The air in Maple Creek Park was sharp with pine and the hum of Saturday. Joggers traced the trail's curve, parents packed up soccer gear, and Reggie Summers walked a few paces behind his dog, Shadow, a lean Belgian Malinois whose gait still had the precision of training drills. The leash hung loose between them, Trust doing most of the work. He wasn't in uniform, not that kind of man anymore. Just gray sweats, a worn hoodie, and calm eyes that tracked everything without seeming, till years of Delta Force discipline never left. It simply learned to breathe quieter. When the cruiser turned off the main road and rolled onto the park's access path, most people barely noticed. Reggie did. He watched the sunlight blink off the windshield and the way both front doors opened, before the car stopped fully. Two officers stepped out, Brad Lewis first, posture wide, hand already resting on his belt. Todd Maxwell following, hesitant, trying to mirror confidence. Brad called out, "Sir, leash control. We've had reports of an aggressive animal." His voice carried the tone of authority used more to end conversations than start them. Reggie stopped, eyes steady. "He's leashed, certified K9, retired military. What's the issue?" Brad's gaze cut to Shadow's alert stance. "That the animal?" "That's my partner," Reggie said. Something in the word partner bothered Brad. He gestured toward Todd. "Let's keep it easy, okay? Hands where I can see them." Reggie blinked slowly. "You're drawing down on a leash, officer. You sure you want to escalate that?" Todd shifted his weight, uncertain. "Brad, maybe it's nothing." But Brad had already moved closer, hand tightening near the holster. "Step back from the dog." A ripple passed through the park, the kind people feel before thunder. Nearby, a jogger slowed. A kid's soccer ball stopped rolling. Natalie Brooks, local reporter off duty, lifted her phone halfway, instinct rising before she could name it. Reggie spoke evenly. "You're spooking him. Just give him space." Brad misread the posture, two bodies squared, a low bark, the kind of tension that fills silence with meaning. "Control your animal." "I am." Then came the crack, loud, shocking, final, not described, only felt in the way sound fell out of the world afterward. The leash snapped slack in Reggie's hand. The park froze. No one saw the motion clearly, only the echo and the disbelief that followed it. Todd's mouth opened, closed. Brad lowered his weapon, eyes wide as if he himself needed to ask what had just happened. Reggie didn't move. He looked at the spot where Shadow lay still and said, "Nothing." His breathing stayed even, but something colder than rage settled behind his eyes. "Why'd you?" Todd stammered. Brad cut him off, defensive reflex firing before reason. "Dog lunged. You saw it." "I didn't," Todd said quietly. People began to gather, drawn by the sound. A woman gasped. Phones lifted. One voice whispered, "They shot his dog." Another said, "I'm recording." Reggie finally knelt, one hand resting on Shadow's shoulder, the other steadying the leash that no longer mattered. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though there was no more movement. He stood slowly, deliberate. "Step back," Brad ordered, voice shaking now. Reggie turned his gaze on him. "You discharged your weapon in a public park. You'll secure that firearm and call your sergeant." "Sir, That's an order," Reggie said softly, and something in the tone made even Todd straighten. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of command, the kind that comes from years of men obeying it without question. Ethan Cole arrived minutes later, summoned by frantic radio chatter. Gray at the temples, steady in appearance, but his eyes flicked from Brad's drawn weapon to the small crowd forming. "Report," he said. Brad pointed at Reggie. "Non-compliant individual, aggressive animal. Who's unarmed and grieving?" Natalie interrupted, voice clear now, phone raised. "You shot a leashed service dog." Ethan frowned. "Ma'am, please step back." Aaron Daniels, former EMT, stepped up beside her. "Everything's on video. Dog never moved." Reggie remained still, hands visible, composure surgical. "Sergeant, I'm requesting veterinary and incident response, and internal affairs. You'll need them both." Ethan's tone hardened. You don't give orders here. Reggie's reply came measured. You'll wish I didn't have to, Todd whispered to Brad. He talks like command. Brad hissed back. He's nobody. Just keep control. But the word nobody hung wrong, even to them. A drone of murmurs, built as bystanders gathered joggers, parents, strangers with camera phones tilted upward to catch every frame. Chloe Adams's livestream notification pinged across social feeds before she realized her hands were shaking. I'm at Maple Creek Park, she told her followers. They just shot a man's dog for nothing. Ethan called for crowd control, backup. Reggie's stillness only made them look more at him. When he finally reached into his pocket, 2 officers flinched. All he took out was a wallet, black leather, worn edges, thin as discipline. He opened it to a small ID, unremarkable except for one insignia, an eagle and dagger etched in subdued gray. Brad frowned. What's that supposed to be? Reggie's voice stayed even. You've already run the wrong command once today. You don't want to do it again. Sir, step away from the weapon, Ethan warned, though his own lowered slightly. Natalie zoomed in with her phone. The insignia caught sunlight just enough for the lens to catch its texture. Comments started rolling in. That's Delta. That's military. Aaron whispered, No way. That's special ops. Reggie didn't confirm, didn't deny. He simply dialed a number on his phone and said, Everett, I need you to hear something. He held the phone outward. The line stayed silent for a beat, then a calm older voice came through. Commander Summers, what's your status? The park went dead quiet. Brad blinked. Commander? Ethan's hand dropped from his belt. Wait, who are you? Reggie lowered the phone. The man whose dog you just killed. The one who trained half your K-9 division's tactics without you knowing it. Someone in the crowd muttered, Oh man. Phones tilted higher. Ethan tried to reassert control. Sir, we need you to calm down. I am calm, Reggie replied. That's what should worry you. The phrase spread through the crowd. Like a shiver, Natalie spoke again, steady. Reporter instincts cutting through the air. Can you state your name for the record? Reggie glanced at her camera. Reggie Summers, retired Delta Force, handler to K-9 Shadow, service number 4147A. A gasp rippled through the group. Someone whispered, He's military. Another said, They didn't even ask. Ethan's radio crackled with the dispatcher's voice. Sergeant Cole, command wants a situation report. There's footage trending already. He looked around, realizing too late how fast the narrative was. Escaping his control, Brad stood stiff, defensive, but sweat was gathering near his temple. Todd stared at the ground. Reggie's composure only made their chaos louder. You'll holster your weapons, document your discharge, and secure this area until a federal liaison arrives. I'll wait. You can't just... Ethan began. Reggie cut in, tone still low. Protocol 9, Echo 7 authorizes field containment when a federal contractor is threatened. You know what that means? Ethan blinked. He did. It meant jurisdictional nightmare. Aaron stepped forward, phone raised. You heard him. Cameras are rolling. Do it right. Natalie's live stream comment counter ticked upward hundreds, then thousands. Brad finally snapped. You think a badge on your wallet scares me? Reggie turned his head slightly. No. The truth will. He nodded toward the crowd. They've got it all now. And so does command. As if on cue, the phone in his hand buzzed. He answered, without looking away from Brad. Go ahead. The voice on the other end, Colonel Everett again, was calm steel. Local authorities have been notified. Remain where you are. Military liaison en route. Do not engage. Yes, sir. Ethan exhaled through his teeth. You're really calling in the army over this? I didn't call anyone, Reggie said. They monitor their own. The crowd's murmur turned into low outrage. Parents pulled kids closer, whispering about the dog, the badge, the arrogance. Chloe's feed crossed 10,000 viewers. Comments flashed. This man's a vet. That cop's done. Reggie crouched once more beside Shadow, his hand steady on the still fur. He whispered something no one could hear, then stood. Sergeant, I'm requesting to be escorted to my vehicle until command arrives. Ethan nodded, slowly. Fine. But you're not leaving the scene. I'm not running from anything, Reggie said. They began walking toward the parking lot. Phones followed like satellites. Brad trailed behind, anger twitching under the skin of discipline. At the lot's edge, blue lights from new cruisers flickered in. Internal affairs, early, drawn by viral gravity. Detective Harold Fletcher stepped out civilian suit, badge glinting. He glanced at Reggie, then at the officers. Who fired? Brad lifted his hand halfway. I did, sir. Aggressive animal. Fletcher's tone was surgical. Any injuries? None to personnel. To civilians? Silence. To the animal? Fletcher pressed. Reggie answered for him. One fatality. Belgian Malinois. Name was Shadow. The detective's eyes moved to Reggie's wallet still open on the hood of his car. He saw the insignia. His face changed instantly. Commander Summers? Reggie nodded once. Fletcher's pen stilled. We're going to handle this by the book. You'd better, Reggie said. Brad muttered. This is insane. Fletcher turned. You're relieved of duty pending investigation. Hand over your service weapon. What? You can't now. Brad hesitated, then unclipped his holster, the weight of the pistol suddenly heavy. Todd stepped forward quietly, voice shaking. Detective, I saw everything. The dog didn't lunge, it just barked once. The words landed like confession and judgment both. Fletcher wrote it down. Statement logged. Body cam footage? Malfunctioned, Brad said quickly. Reggie spoke without looking up. Convenient. Fletcher's phone buzzed. He read the screen and looked back at Reggie. Command wants a statement directly from you. Colonel Everett's on video link. Reggie nodded, took the phone, and turned slightly away from the officers. His voice dropped low, measured. Sir, I'm stable. Civilian dog deceased. Officers, discharged weapon without threat present. Crowd control established. Requesting federal oversight for local review. Everett's voice came back firm. Understood. Hold position. Liaison 15 out. Reggie handed the phone back. Fletcher looked around at the forming ring of spectators. We're shutting this down. Everyone back 50 feet. But it was too late for quiet containment. Chloe's live stream had been mirrored across feeds. Natalie's station editor was already calling her. Aaron had uploaded footage to a veteran support group titled, They Shot a Hero's Dog. Within minutes, hashtags multiplied, though Reggie hadn't said a word beyond protocol. As the crowd shifted, a boy approached with a folded American flag, his father's from a scout ceremony. He held it out awkwardly. For your dog, sir. Reggie looked down, something breaking through the steel in his eyes. He accepted the flag with a nod. Thank you. Ethan Cole stood aside, shoulders sagging. We didn't know, he muttered. You didn't ask, Reggie said quietly. The first TV van pulled into the lot, satellite dish rising. The story had left the park and entered the bloodstream of the nation. Reggie closed his eyes once, steadying breath. In his head he heard training echoes, voices of command, the sound of Shadow's bark in a desert wind. Then he opened them, clear again. He looked at Fletcher. When your report goes in, make sure the record shows I stayed calm. It already does, Fletcher replied. And the footage proves it. Reggie nodded, gaze turning to the cruiser where Brad now sat behind glass, face pale, hand trembling. Then let justice do the rest. The sun had dipped low enough to cast the park in gold, the kind of light that makes every shadow long and honest. Around them the murmurs quieted, not peace but respect, the kind earned when truth stands on its own. The crowd that had frozen in Maple Creek Park didn't move for a long time. They watched Reggie Summers stand by the cruiser, the folded flag still in his hand as unmarked sedans began to edge into the lot. Cameras swung toward them, internal affairs, local reporters, one federal vehicle. Detective Fletcher met the first newcomer halfway, a woman in a dark suit with clipped vowels and a badge that simply read, D. Mills, U.S. Liaison. She didn't introduce herself to the officers first. She walked straight to Reggie. "Commander Summers," she said quietly. "Colonel Everett sends his respect." Reggie nodded once. "You're Captain Mills." "Correct. We'll take it from here." The exchange was polite, but the air changed. Reporters who had been shouting questions fell silent. Mills looked toward Fletcher. "Contain the perimeter. Secure the firearms discharge log. I'll debrief on site." Brad Lewis tried to speak. "Ma'am, She didn't look at him. "Stand by." Reggie's calm was starting to unsettle even the bystanders. Natalie Brooks was still streaming, whispering into her mic. "It's official now. Federal liaison just arrived. The officer hasn't said a word since he handed over his gun." When Mills turned back to Reggie, her voice softened. "We'll move you to a quiet location. But before that, Command wants a field statement. Keep it brief." Reggie exhaled once. My K-9 partner Shadow was restrained. Officers approached without cause, ignored verbal de-escalation and discharged a firearm. I remained compliant. I am requesting full jurisdictional review and post-incident veterinary handling under Section 12A. Mills nodded. "Statement logged." She stepped aside, speaking into her earpiece. The words "federal review" reached the crowd, and another wave of murmurs rippled through the park. Aaron Daniels recorded the exchange, saying softly to his camera, "He's still not raising his voice. Not once." Fletcher walked back over. "Commander, we'll escort you downtown for a formal interview. You're not under arrest." "I know," Reggie said, "but they are under scrutiny." As the cars rolled away, Natalie turned her lens on the park sign Maple Creek Community Area and said to her viewers, "That name's about to trend nationwide." At the precinct, the atmosphere was taut but sterile. Reggie sat alone in an interview room, hands folded, posture perfect. Across the one-way glass, Fletcher, Mills, and a legal observer watched. "He's composed," the observer whispered. "He's trained," Mills replied. "That's composure under fire, literally." Inside, Reggie spoke only when prompted. He described the sequence exactly as it happened: distance, commands given, tone of the officers. No emotion, just fact. Fletcher recorded every word. Halfway through, Mills received a message on her tablet. She read it, then leaned toward Fletcher. "Footage verified. 2 civilian videos and 1 dash cam from a nearby patrol confirm his account. Dog never advanced." Fletcher closed his notebook slowly. "That's going to move fast." "It already has," Mills said. "Congressional Liaison's office just flagged it for civil oversight. They'll call it training failure." Reggie looked up. "It's not training. It's assumption." The words hung in the room, quiet but absolute. Later that evening, Reggie stepped outside the precinct. Reporters were gathered behind a barrier. The air was filled with camera flashes and low questions. He didn't stop for interviews, but Natalie Brooks managed to call out, "Commander, what do you want people to take from this?" He paused, met her eyes. "That calm isn't weakness. It's proof we've had to stay calm too long." Then, he walked to the waiting black sedan. That night, the footage reached national networks. Anchor voices replayed the clip frame by frame, the calm leash, the command tone the officers misread, and audiences reacted the same way people had in the park. Silence first, then anger, then questions. Military sources quietly confirmed Reggie's record. Headlines shifted from park incident to decorated veteran's dog killed by police. Federal statements followed within hours. At sunrise, Reggie sat on his porch with the folded flag beside him. His phone buzzed an incoming call from Colonel Everett. "You handled yourself the only way possible," the colonel said. "I handled it the way Shadow was trained to," Reggie answered. "Stay until the job's done." Everett was silent for a moment. "Command's launching a partnership review with local agencies. They'll want you to advise. Then we'll turn this into something that changes behavior," Reggie said. By mid-morning, the department held a press conference. Sergeant Cole spoke briefly, voice shaking. "The department extends condolences to Commander Summers. An internal investigation is underway. Reggie watched it from home, expression unreadable. When a reporter asked him later if he accepted the apology, he said only, "Apologies are words. I'm waiting for accountability." The viral momentum turned into policy pressure. The governor requested federal cooperation for retraining. The Pentagon offered resources. Across social media, veterans and K-9 handlers posted photos tagged, "Justice for Shadow." In every post, Reggie's demeanor, the quiet composure at the moment of loss, became the center of discussion. It wasn't outrage that moved people. It was discipline. 3 days later, Captain Mills visited his home. "Command cleared you of all involvement," she said. "But they're recommending you lead a task force on police military protocol, Civil Liaison Division." Reggie looked out over his yard where the leash hung coiled on a post. "If they'll listen, I'll teach. If not, I'll record." Mills smiled faintly. "After this week, they'll listen." The news cycle began to settle, but reforms didn't. Departments across the state issued new engagement procedures for service animals. The governor signed the order under a quiet headline, Summers Act. Reggie didn't attend the ceremony. He visited the park. Instead, a new plaque stood near the trailhead, simple metal on stone, in memory of Shadow loyal partner, protector, and peacekeeper. Parents stopped to read it. Joggers nodded. A child placed a single tennis ball beneath it. Reggie stood for a moment, the sun cutting through the pines, then whispered, "Rest now. Mission complete." He walked back toward the parking lot, calm as ever, while a news crew filmed from a distance. And though he never looked at the camera, the nation saw what mattered: discipline without cruelty, justice without vengeance, and a man who had turned restraint into power. The hearings began in early spring, when the city's marble-lined council chamber still carried the chill of winter. Outside, reporters waited behind metal barricades, their microphones labeled with networks that had already replayed the park footage 100 times. Inside, Reggie Summers sat alone at a long table, his hands folded, posture precise, eyes calm. There were no decorations on his lapel, no ribbons, no rank pins, only the small black band on his wrist engraved with the name, Shadow. Across from him sat the 3 officers and their counsel. Officer Brad Lewis stared at the floor. Sergeant Ethan, Cole read from notes he didn't believe in. Todd Maxwell, the youngest, looked like he hadn't slept in days. Between them stretched a silence so thick that even the stenographer hesitated before typing. When the chairwoman, a retired federal judge, called the session to order, she spoke in the clipped tone of someone who had seen too many excuses. "Commander Summers, thank you for appearing. We understand this is voluntary." Reggie nodded once. "Transparency doesn't require permission." A murmur rippled through the crowd of citizens, veterans, and officers who had come to watch. They had seen the video, but few had seen the man behind the calm. The city attorney began the questioning gently, as if afraid to disturb the balance. "Commander, could you describe your actions that day?" Reggie's voice carried the steadiness of someone who had repeated the memory enough times to take the pain out of it. He described the leash, the warning he gave, the single command, ignored. He listed every procedural step as if reading a manual. When he finished, there was no anger, just an empty finality that sounded heavier than shouting. The attorney tried again. "At any moment did you make a motion that could have, been perceived as aggressive?" Reggie answered, "No. My posture was neutral. My words were requests, not orders. I acted as any civilian should expect to act, with respect and restraint." The stenographer kept up this time, keys clicking like rain against glass. When the defense rose, their argument felt smaller than the room that held it. They spoke of adrenaline, miscommunication, mistaken signals. Reggie listened, neither frowning nor nodding, simply letting the words fall. When it was his turn to respond, he said, "I've been in real combat. This wasn't that. Confusion is not an excuse for disregard." The judge leaned back. "Commander, what do you hope comes from this?" "Accountability," he said, "not for punishment's sake, for learning's sake. It was the first time anyone had heard the word learning inside those walls. By the end of the week, the board released its findings. Excessive force, negligence of protocol, mandatory reform. The decision landed across headlines like a gavel. For once, the story didn't end with outrage, it ended with instruction. At the press conference, Reggie refused to speak about blame. Instead, he told reporters, "When mistakes happen in combat, we rewrite the manual. It's time law enforcement did the same." That single sentence became a national quote. Editorials titled it the Summers Doctrine. Captain Dana Mills called him that evening. "You realize Congress just echoed your line on the floor?" Reggie replied, "Then they can put it to work." Within days, the Department of Justice and the Pentagon announced a joint initiative, the Summers Act, to cross-train police and federal agencies on restraint, canine protocol, and threat identification. The announcement used his name reluctantly at first, but the public insisted. Hashtags changed from outrage to aspiration. Summers Standard. Reggie's life turned into movement, briefings, lectures, endless interviews he tried to shorten. Each, City Hall felt the same curved microphones, fluorescent lights, and an undercurrent of curiosity that mixed awe with guilt. He never let them treat him like a symbol. "I'm a teacher now," he told Mills. "Teachers don't need applause, they need attention." At the first federal symposium on ethical enforcement, he opened with a single story from his Delta Force years. He spoke of a night in Kandahar when Shadow had stood between his team and a tripwire they hadn't seen. "He froze," Reggie said. "He waited for my command before taking another step. That pause saved 6 lives. Discipline isn't hesitation, it's awareness." The hall was silent long after he stepped down from the podium. The next morning, training centers across the country replayed the clip for new recruits. Not everyone celebrated. A handful of departments complained that the reform slowed response times or made officers second-guess themselves. Reggie met those criticisms the same way he had faced gunfire, with precision. "If a second guess saves a first mistake, it's worth the time," he told one skeptical chief. A pause isn't weakness, it's strategy. The more resistance he met, the calmer he became. Journalists began calling him the quiet commander. He refused television debates, preferring workshops where he could look officers in the eye. "You can't lecture someone into empathy," he explained. "You have to model it." During one session in Texas, an officer stood and said, "Sir, you talk about control like it's easy, but out there it's chaos." Reggie smiled faintly. "Then bring order with the one thing chaos can't handle: clarity." Months passed. Results arrived. Internal affairs departments reported measurable drops in wrongful animal shootings and accidental discharges. Civil complaints fell. Veterans joined as instructors, blending military precision with community awareness. The numbers weren't perfect, but they were better. The governor of North Carolina invited Reggie to Raleigh to honor him for transformational leadership. He declined the medal and asked that the funds be donated to establish the Shadow Scholarship for K-9 handler education. "Recognition fades," he said. "Education endures." When Captain Mills called to tell him the scholarship had already filled its first class, he answered quietly, "Then Shadow's still working." The media tried to shape a narrative around him. The soldier who retaught America how to stay calm. Reggie resisted myth-making. He still lived in the same small house, still kept early hours, still walked the same park trail where it had all begun. The memorial plaque stood polished now, often surrounded by flowers or small flags left by strangers. Sometimes he would see a child stop to read it aloud, and he'd nod without introducing himself. That was enough. At night, he kept a journal, not of grievances but of ideas, ways to measure empathy. New training models, mentorship programs for rookies. The final entry for that spring read, "We've built policies. Next, we build character." When the National Oversight Commission met to review the first year of the Summers Act, Reggie attended as an observer. He sat in the back row, unseen by most, listening as officials quoted his principles in policy language. One delegate concluded, "In summary, the Summers Standard is now the baseline for humane enforcement." He left before the applause, stepping into the hallway where Captain Mills caught up to him. You know, Commander, you could have stayed to hear your name in history. Reggie shook his head. History doesn't need me. It needs follow-through. Later that summer, the same city council that had once interrogated him invited him back not for another hearing, but to dedicate a new training facility. The plaque on the entrance read, "The Shadow Unit, EST, in honor of Commander Reggie Summers and K-9 Shadow, who turned tragedy into teaching." He stood quietly as the ribbon was cut. Reporters waited for a speech. Instead, he simply placed his hand on the bronze nameplate and whispered, "Mission continued." By the year's end, analysts reported the data in unambiguous terms. Fewer incidents, fewer complaints, rising trust. The change was measurable, but Reggie refused to call it victory. Change doesn't have finish lines, he told Mills, only checkpoints. That winter, as snow dusted Maple Creek Park, he returned once more to the memorial. A group of cadets was there, reading the plaque aloud as part of their orientation. One recognized him, startled. "Sir, do you want to say something to the new class?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Yes, remember this. You don't earn authority by raising your voice. You earn it by lowering someone else's fear." The cadets wrote it down. It would become the first sentence in the next edition of the Summers Training Manual. When the day ended, Reggie walked back to his truck, the folded flag still resting on the dashboard. He looked at it and felt something close to peace. Shadow's work was finished, but the mission wasn't. And as long as calm had a place in a world of noise, Reggie Summers would remain its quiet teacher. By the second anniversary of the Summers, ACT, what had begun as a local training plan, had grown into a quiet national movement. Reggie Summers no longer stood at podiums. He stood in classrooms, community centers, and gymnasiums converted into mock command rooms. Each place looked different, but everyone carried the same purpose: to teach measured response and moral stamina. The country was listening, though it didn't always agree. He never sought publicity. When reporters asked why his image still appeared, on recruitment posters he said, "If it keeps the lesson alive, let it stay. The face isn't what matters, the message is." The message was everywhere, on handbooks, field manuals, even pocket cards clipped inside duty belts. Pause, assess, decide. 3 words that had become policy. Federal oversight data showed fewer escalations, more community reports resolved without force. Academics called it the Summers effect. Reggie avoided the term, but he read every study, marking margins with notes, focus on empathy metrics, add civilian voices to audit panels. When Captain Mills, now Deputy Director Mills, visited his office, she found the papers stacked by region. "You're still auditing everyone yourself?" she asked. Reggie smiled. "Old habits. Accountability doesn't outsource well." That summer he traveled through the southern states by car, visiting departments that had once refused training. In Georgia, an older sheriff admitted the change had surprised him. "My men thought your program would slow them down," he said. "Turns out it slowed their tempers instead. That's better." Reggie replied, "Speed's only useful when you're headed the right way." They shook hands, no cameras, just quiet recognition. Everywhere he went, he met the same pattern. Reluctance, trial, then respect. Officers who once bristled at the idea of restraint now quoted his lines in briefings. "Discipline isn't silence," one told him in Alabama. "It's direction." Reggie corrected gently, "It's both." At each stop, he met community volunteers who had joined joint response teams, paramedics, veterans, teachers. "We're all part of the first response now," they said. Reggie nodded. "Good, that's the point." But the bigger the reform grew, the more politics tried to claim it. Some states wanted to brand their own versions. Others resisted federal partnership altogether. A few legislators called the Summers Act too idealistic. When invited to testify before a budget committee, Reggie kept his tone neutral. "You can't measure trust in quarterly reports," he told them, "but you can measure what happens when it's gone." The line made the evening news again, not fiery, just clear. Commentators said he had the patience of consequence, a phrase he privately disliked but understood. Back in Washington, Mills managed the logistics while he focused on mentorship. Together they built the Summers Institute, a year-long fellowship, pairing young officers with veterans and social service experts. The curriculum blended tactics with communication, half classroom, half field immersion. Reggie wrote the introduction himself. Authority without empathy is unstable. Empathy without structure is unsustainable. Balance them, and you get peace that lasts past the shift. Within a year, graduates of the program began leading precincts. Their reports showed steady declines in conflict and improved morale. The quiet success embarrassed no one. It simply worked. When the third year approached, Reggie started stepping back. "You built this," Mills told him. "We built awareness," he corrected. "Building never ends." He still visited Maple Creek Park once a month. The bronze statue of Shadow stood firm, polished by weather and children's hands. Beneath it lay patches, ribbons, and handwritten notes. "Thank you for teaching patience." He read them, but never signed his own name in return. During one visit, Todd Maxwell, now Captain Maxwell, met him at the memorial. "Sir, I wanted you to see the new field manual," he said, handing over a crisp binder. Inside, on the title page, the heading read Operational Integrity, the Summers Model. Reggie closed it after the first paragraph. "Good work," he said quietly. "Just remember, it's only words until someone lives them." Maxwell nodded. "That's why we still quote you during roll call." "What line?" "The one about control." Reggie chuckled softly. "Then you're still learning." Later that year, Congress held a national review of policing reforms. The Summers Act topped the agenda. Analysts presented data graphs, projections, fiscal savings. But what caught attention was testimony from community members. One woman said her teenage son had been stopped during a traffic check. The officer kept his hand on his heart instead of his holster, she said. "That one change changed everything." The room fell silent, numbers forgotten. Reggie watched the broadcast from his living room, coffee in hand. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "That's the proof," he murmured to the empty room. The following winter, Mills called again. "Commander, the President's considering you for the National Service Medal." Reggie sighed. "Medals don't train people." "It's symbolic," she said. "Then let the symbol be the program, not me." When the announcement came, he declined publicly but attended the ceremony privately, standing at the back of the hall. The presenter read a short statement he had written himself. "Change doesn't wear uniforms. It wears persistence." Applause filled the room. He slipped, out before it ended. In his final year at the Institute, Reggie taught one last seminar. The class expected a lecture on tactics. Instead, he spoke about leadership. "Every generation thinks it invented restraint," he began. "It didn't. It rediscovered it." He told them about patience learned in deserts, about the pause that saved lives, about the quiet that followed discipline. No drama, just the truth shaped by time. When he finished, no one clapped. They stood in silence, understanding that applause would break the spell. After class, a recruit asked what he would do next. "Teach civilians how to talk to authority," he said. "Authority's learned. Trust is practiced." Months later, the Institute released its annual report. National incidents down another 22%. Public confidence highest in decades. The final paragraph credited the continued mentorship of Commander Summers, whose philosophy of calm professionalism remains the foundation of modern de-escalation training. Reggie read it once, folded the paper, and set it beside the framed flag on his desk. Outside, the evening light stretched across the yard in long gold lines. He whispered the same words he'd spoken from the beginning, neither prayer nor promise, just purpose. Mission ongoing. And as dusk settled over the quiet neighborhood, the man who had turned a tragedy into a template for respect finally allowed himself to breathe, knowing the next generation already understood what he had spent a lifetime teaching, that real strength is the stillness between decisions. By the fifth year of the Summers Act, the movement no longer needed headlines to survive. It breathed on its own inside briefing rooms, police academies, and even classrooms where students studied civic ethics through Reggie Summers's case file. The file itself had become a teaching document, not about blame, but about response. "What do you do?" the workbook asked, "when power meets patience?" Reggie, now gray at the temples, spent his mornings at the Institute's training grounds, still rising before dawn. He'd walk the perimeter before the cadets arrived, a mug of black coffee in hand, listening to the rhythmic calls of the early drills. The young instructors waved, half in respect, half in superstition. Many said discipline felt sharper when he was nearby. He had turned down 3 federal promotions and 1 academic chair. "Titles echo," he told Mills. "Teaching changes." Own. So he stayed in the classroom, writing in a slow, looping hand on the whiteboard. Composure is not silence. It's intelligence choosing its timing. The recruits leaned in whenever he spoke. He never lectured from notes. His stories arrived like lessons smoothed by time. One afternoon he said, "You can memorize procedures, but the hardest skill you'll ever learn is reading fear and refusing to add to it." The room went still, pencils hovering. They all wrote it down, yet change, as always, came with pressure. A few big city departments had begun cutting budgets for continued training, claiming success had made the reforms unnecessary. The news irritated Mills more than it worried Reggie. "They're rewriting history," she said. He replied, "That's what success tempts people to do, forget how costly learning was." When budget hearings reopened, Reggie flew to the Capitol again, this time as an advisor, not a witness. He sat behind the committee tables, quiet until asked to speak. A senator turned to him. "Commander Summers, are these programs still worth the funding?" Reggie's answer was as even as ever. "If you stop watering the plant because it's finally green, don't be surprised when it fades." The chamber fell silent. Then the chair simply said, "Noted." Funding passed the next week. Back home, Reggie found letters waiting in his mailbox, hundreds of them, from students, veterans, even parents. One read, "My son wants to join law enforcement now because he saw someone like you handle anger with calm." Another simply said, "Thank you for making safety feel possible again." He kept them in a wooden box beneath the flag case, never for display, just reminders that patience still reached people. As the Institute matured, Reggie shifted focus from police training to public education. He launched a program pairing citizens with officers for community simulations. The goal wasn't performance, it was conversation. "If both sides feel heard," he told the first group, "tension has nowhere to live." The model spread to dozens of cities under the name Project Bridge. Where it worked best, crime reports fell not because enforcement increased, but because understanding did. By its 6th year, the press began calling him the Architect of Calm. The title made him laugh. An architect draws lines. I erase them. But Mills insisted the nickname fit. "You built trust out of ruins," she said. "That's architecture enough." They toured campuses together, addressing mixed audiences of cadets and civilians. Reggie always opened with the same line, "I don't train people to hold fire, I train them to hold thought." At first it puzzled listeners. Then they'd realize he meant it literally, that every delay between impulse and reaction was a second, bought for peace. One evening after a lecture, a young woman approached him. "Commander, my brother was one of your early students. He says you changed how he sees people." Reggie smiled. He changed himself. I just reminded him he could. Political change followed social change. Several states signed on to the National Standard for De-Escalation, directly modeled on the Summers curriculum. News anchors debated whether it was the most successful reform program in decades. Reggie stayed out of the conversation. He preferred the quiet of the Institute's courtyard, where a bronze statue of Shadow now faced the morning sun. Fresh flowers appeared there almost daily. During the Institute's 5th-year ceremony, Mills presented Reggie with a small plaque of her own design, plain wood, no ornament. It read, for proving that discipline can be taught without fear. He accepted it with a nod. "That's all I ever wanted," he said. After the ceremony, a group of young instructors gathered around him. One asked, "Sir, how do we keep this alive when you retire?" Reggie looked at them carefully. "By living it. Don't quote me. Prove me." Retirement crept up quietly. He didn't announce it. He simply stopped scheduling new classes. Mills found out only when his office light stayed off 2 mornings in a row. She drove out to his house near the foothills, where he was fixing the Amway porch railing. "Planning to disappear?" she teased. "Planning to let others speak," he said. "You could at least leave a final address for the graduates." "I already did. It's called their conscience." They stood for a while, watching sunlight spread over the trees. "You know," she said softly, "every department in the country uses your manual now. That's legacy." Reggie chuckled. "Legacy's what people say when they want to stop improving. Tell them the manual's just the first draft." In the years that followed, the Summers Act evolved into an umbrella for public safety collaboration. The Institute expanded overseas. Visiting officers from allied nations came to study the American model of calm enforcement. Most wanted to meet Reggie. Few managed to find him. He'd retreated fully to the mountains, living quietly with a pair of rescue dogs that reminded him of Shadow without replacing him. Locals knew him simply as Mr. Summers, the veteran who helps train the search teams. Occasionally, when new instructors sent him reports, he would reply with short, handwritten notes. "Proud of you. Keep the pause alive." On the 10th anniversary of the original incident, the Institute hosted a memorial symposium. Mills opened with a speech dedicated to the man who taught a country to breathe before it acts. A pre-recorded message from Reggie played afterward. His voice, older but steady, filled the hall. "If you remember anything from this journey, let it be this: justice isn't noise, it's balance. Keep that balance, and we keep each other." The audience rose, not in applause but in the same respectful silence that had followed his every appearance. Later that evening, in the quiet of his mountain porch, Reggie watched the horizon fade into dusk. The folded flag still rested on the mantel inside, beside a photo of Shadow taken years before. He felt the cool wind move through the pines and whispered the words that had anchored him since the first day of reform. Mission ongoing. He didn't mean it as repetition. He meant it as continuity, that the mission no longer needed him to continue. Somewhere out there, another instructor was quoting his line, another recruit was learning to breathe before deciding, and another, life was being saved by a second of patience. That was the legacy he never asked for but left behind anyway. The calm that changed everything, one measured heartbeat at a time.